unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back, folks, to another Super Tuesday. I hope you guys ready for a super double show. And speaking with my in sync with my four friends before what you just heard, I might as well say this. I'm Dr. J, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live. I just had to do it because it kind of sounds kind of cool. Anyhow, like I said, a double show for you today. Two of my top guests who have been on the show so many times over the past 5 years because they never repeat themselves. They are so full of knowledge, and they're both hosts. That shows you the level of intelligence they have and the level of knowledge. Our first guest, which you all should know because he is a host right here on Late Night in the Midlands, which, by the way, those of you in the United Kingdom listening via Deprogrammed and, of course, here in the United States, thanks to Wise Frog, listening through Black Swamp Digital Radio, may not be aware of all the hosts on Late Night in the Midlands. So let me tell you about Aage Nost. He is, like I said, a host, a researcher, and a guest going on several years. He actually solved a problem for me. This is just a little side note that I had been trying to solve for over 2 decades. Yes, 2 decades. And in minutes of just having the conversation of telling him the problem, I think it was probably about 30 seconds that he just gave me the solution. I'll tell you what the problem is, folks. The problem was, I said to Aage, Aage, every time I freaking meditate, I cannot shut my mind the hell up. I said, that's the biggest problem. I know I'm supposed to focus on breathing. I know I'm supposed to have visuals. I mean, people who even count down in their mind, I've taken it a step further. And instead of actually vocally saying it in my mind, what I do is I picture a number 10 and then a number 9. And sometimes they even picture me drawing it. So I told Aage my problem. He goes, that's easy. And of course, I've heard that several times. Oh, just, breathe or pay attention to your breath or numbers. So I'm thinking it's something like this, but I did warn him it's pretty difficult. He said, it doesn't matter. It's easy. I'm like, okay, what do you do? And he goes, are you in a relaxed position right now? And I said, yes. He goes, find something that's vertical, like a line in front of you, and in a comfortable position so you don't have to move your head and neck anywhere. And I said, I'm seeing blinds in front of me. Then he said to look at that line and then slowly cross your eyes, but not to the point of being uncomfortable, but just to the point where you see 2 of the lines. And then close your eyes. Boom. Instantly, mind was quiet as, I don't know what to say, quiet as a baby sleeping, I guess. And then he said, if a thought comes in your mind, tell that thought, to essentially go away. And then we got onto the topic of Einstein's distraction method. He solved one of the biggest problems for me. So that I just want to thank him publicly. So now that he's heard enough about me talking about him, I might as well bring him on with us to be on physically. So Aage Nost, how are you, my friend?
Well, I am wonderful. Gosh, you shouldn't talk like this. I could turn out being big-headed by the time you're done.
Well, the reality is you really solved a seriously major problem for me, and I have to thank you for it because I've gone to hypnotherapists. I've gone to medical doctors who are hypnotherapists. I've read everything I can get my hands on going back to 1998. And on top of that, if that wasn't enough, then, of course, I was listening to meditations. Now, I see Robert is here. Folks, we've been having some technical issues, so I'm just going to give you the quick warning. If we drop as we try to add Robert Morningstar to this, hang tight. We'll be right back. And like I said the other day, I believe it was yesterday, welcome to live radio. So hang tight real quick, and we will pick this up right now. Let's just pray it connects to Robert Morningstar without dropping us off. So far, so good. So far, so good. Let's just see if he's here. Robert, can you hear us? Okay, well, he's not there yet. Well, I mean, I see he's connected. I guess I will just physically wait for him to say something. Robert, you with us?
I am here.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
perfect.
here, here.
I was perfect. I was just giving the introduction to Aage, and I was telling the world how he taught me something that was so invaluable, so priceless about how to shut my mind off in meditation that nobody has been able to solve. So I wanted to thank him again publicly. That's what you essentially missed. And then I was telling people that today they get two guests who are not just amazing guests who have been on the show for several years, 5 years actually to be exact. And on top of that, actually 5.5 years if you think about it. And on top of that, that you two are both hosts, which obviously says two major things. One, you guys are very intelligent, you know a lot. And two, because you're able to do multiple shows and never once repeating yourself. I mean, geez, Robert, back in April, before I even came live on air, just because it happened to be April, me and you got into the Titanic story. I know I'm not trying to rehash that story for today. We'll save that for another day. But that just goes to show the depth of how much these two gentlemen know. So all I have to say, folks, is that you are in for a double treat. Now, there was two topics that I was going to ask individually of either of them, and then obviously the third topic is basically no holds barred for the two of them. And because both gentlemen know at least the very first topic and Robert knows at least the secondary topic, I for both of you gentlemen, if you think you can respond to the others, by all means. The first topic is what Aage had mentioned about the mastermind groups. And as he went on to say it, I immediately realized that he's talking about the Maharishi effect. Go ahead and explain it for us, Aage, because this is a huge principle that I think even people who go to church every week on Sundays don't understand the level that they are affecting the consciousness of this planet.
Yeah, it's a concept that is not very well understood, but it has been used for a very long time. And even back into the Roman Empire, they talked about Caesar had his most bright people around him, and they were, in our terms, brainstorming how to keep the Roman Empire together. Well, it didn't work, but they tried really hard. And the mastermind, that is, for a definition, the best one I can come up with is that when two or more minds are united in harmony, they create a third mind that has the potential mind power of the two or more of them multiplied by each other. So let's say that we have 100,000 people. Let's say that 100,000 people listening to this show. Now we multiply 100,000 by 100,000. That means that we have the combined mind power of 10 billion people, or actually 10 billion minds.
Exponentially, in other words, because that is a very key thing to mention.
Yeah, and the thing is that whatever problem we're trying to solve, or if we want to try to create something, when we are thinking about that thing that we want to create, it's not just a thought. If we add intention to it, it is an energy. And that energy, if you multiply that by 100,000, now you get the energy of 10 billion minds going in one direction, trying to solve a challenge or create something new. And guess what? That's what happened in the last presidential election, because people were sick and tired of the corruption. They wanted something new. They didn't know exactly what they wanted or who, but there was this guy, and they voted for him, and he became president. It was the mastermind of the American people that created that, because all of the cheating and everything that went on the other side, they were so self-confident, they knew they couldn't lose. Well, the mastermind took it over.
That is absolutely right, and I have me and Robert. I unfortunately I used to be. I don't think this is unfortunate. This is just the truth. I always, every time a guest was on who was from politics, for instance, Michael Dukakis, he just confirmed again today. Robert Morningstar was present when I recorded him earlier this year. When that, unfortunately, that interview has not been released. That's the unfortunate part. But he did talk about how he got into politics and how he inspired. The point I'm getting at is up until Donald J. Trump was elected, I was able to cater to my guests politically. If I was speaking to a Democrat, you would have thought that I'm a socialist Democrat. If I was speaking to a Republican, you're like, he's from the GOP. If I was speaking to a libertarian, I cater to them. Unfortunately, I cannot do that any longer because my red colors have come out to the point where in liberal California, I'm rocking my Make America Great Again hat. If you folks don't like it, well, I'm sorry to say that, but you can discuss politics after Donald J. Trump is out of office, because in the meantime, if it's Trump, in my mind, he can't go wrong because he's one of the coolest guys. Still, Roger Stone still earned the moniker the coolest cat who's ever walked this earth. Now, speaking with what you just said, Aage, I'm going to flip it to Robert for a quick second. Robert, I know you agree with what Aage just said. The leftists, the liberals, Hillary in particular, over 3 decades of baggage and the ability to have a horrible history with the truth, literally lying up and down, selling guns to ISIS, killing off Gaddafi, fumbling the Benghazi incident, and blaming it on some poor filmmaker who had to do some time in prison. I'm sure you agree exactly with Aage said, right? That she was so confident, and clearly Obama, Bill Clinton, James Comey, John Brennan, and everybody that QAnon talks about, and the news even talks about, of who was part of the literally treasonous of rigging the election for Hillary Clinton. We're so confident that they would not only win, they would not only rig the election in Hillary's favor, but that they would get away with it. And what Aage just said is that collectively, yes, they thought they were going to get away with it, but the silent majority is what people are known. I just say angry Americans at this point, or basically all of Americans, because of their collective consciousness saying no more lying, no more socialism, no more higher taxes. They probably influenced the outcome of the election in ways that I don't believe any of them know. I don't think that even just them voting, if they didn't have such strong beliefs, would have swung it to the right. What say you, Robert? Robert Morningstar, can you hear us? Robert, going once, going twice. Okay, Robert, I'll let you speak when you're ready. Okay, Aage, I know you just said that, but going back to, I guess, the question, which was essentially confirming with what... Oh, wait a minute.
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Dr. J.
That's
There's
okay.
a momentary glitch on Skype.
There actually is. We've been talking about just that.
Anyway, let's get back to the point. I agree completely about the operation of the mastermind. The mastermind here is an extension of what's called the zeitgeist, which is the spirit of the times. But I have to warn people, this phenomenon works in both ways. If you aggregate a sufficient number of minds in an agitated, negative, and chaotic state, you produce that. And what we saw in the last election was really a battle of two masterminds. A mastermind of openness, straight talk, candor, frankness, to another one, a mastermind of deception and incitement, aggravation. So I want to warn people, Obama and Clinton are coming out of the woodwork in this election. And I saw something today which is really disturbing, which was Hillary Clinton in an interview that was on CNN. And I want you people to look at it. She is asked by the reporter, I think that we've been greatly divided along gender lines and racial lines, and I see a real war breaking out between men and women. And when he says that, Hillary Clinton breaks out in the biggest smile that you have ever seen since her last defeat. I swear to God. The woman's emotions are so twisted that when the reporter poses the question about an incipient civil war between the genders, the witch actually smiles broadly with great satisfaction at the prospect of answering the question. So there are two mastermind elements. You know, the human mind, if you believe in the Jungian mind as opposed to the Freudian mind, the Jungian model of the mind says that we have a consciousness and we have the unconscious. And in the unconscious lurk certain archetypes. And one of those archetypes is the shadow. And everyone, or very few people, are willing to acknowledge their own shadows. And what the shadow is that there's yin and yang. And so Jung posited that for all your brilliance, all your luminosity, all your goodness in the core of your soul, in the psyche, there lurks a counter force called the shadow, which is the sum total of all your negativity, all your flaws, all the things you dislike and like to hide from yourself. And so I see that the great mind, the mastermind, as Aage Nost is describing, was bifurcated in the last election, and the shadow came out of the woodwork. And the shadow was just ready, quite appropriately using the term, it was ready to overshadow the nation and turn us over to UN domination and globalism. But the individuality, the individual souls of Americans coalesced into this mastermind that Agnosti is describing. And yes, it was that defeated this onslaught. And you can see today the after effects, the chaos that they are breeding. Let me tell you who the anti-mastermind is, because there's the mastermind, which is the Godhead, providence, divine providence. In God we trust. And then there's the anti-mastermind, which is its opposite. But now this opposite in the Democratic Party has a name and has an image, and it's been defined by them. And through the rules for radicals, which they've adopted as their playbook, they have dedicated the Democratic Party to Lucifer. Those are the words of Saul Alinsky and the rules for radicals. So the mastermind that you are battling right now in this geopolitical storm, maelstrom, whirlpool, is Lucifer is out to destroy the United States of America and seeks to overwhelm us with negativity and hatred. And that is what you're seeing. You are seeing the tactics every day. You are seeing the tactics that were defined by Saul Alinsky, whose preface to his book says that a book is dedicated to Lucifer, the first rebel. See? So now, we are exposing evil. Evil has a mastermind as well. And fortunately, in this time of the internet and interpersonal communications on a mass scale, people are being exposed as to whose agents they really are. That's what I feel. So we have to use the positive and know that when you get negative, you start to become part of that negative hive mind that can create dissonance, disharmony, and chaos. And expect it. It's being engineered right now as I speak.
Engineered is a key thing, and I'm actually glad you talked about that, the polar opposite, because it really has to do about intent. If a group of people are thinking about ill will, then that's exactly what's going to happen because it's amplified. And when me and Aage were talking before the show, and he was talking about masterminds, and of course what I brought up was the Maharishi effect. Now, for those of you who don't know it, well, this is exactly what we're talking about. The first time I heard it goes back to a study that they did in Washington, D.C. They took a group of approximately 1,000 people And for 7 days, they all meditated for 1 hour. During that same hour, everybody was meditating on the same topic. It was to reduce crime in DC. For that week, there was such a huge reduction in crime that it was noticeable. I don't know the exact percentage. I think it could have been somewhere between 30 to 70%. I mean, I know that sounds like an outstanding number, but you can all search it, and if you know the exact number, you can get back to me. But it had a substantial effect. And sure, you could say, well, maybe it had to do with this, or what if it wasn't the Maharishi effect? Well, then if that's the case, why is it the 8th day when they stopped meditating, crime went back up to exactly what it was the day before they started meditating? Now, with what Robert just said, Aage, can you give us your perception of what you've seen about this negative side of the Maharishi effect and the masterminds that really want to destroy us because they literally hold ill will toward us?
Well, the thing about it is that mind techniques like that, they can be used for the light or for darkness, both. And that is where good people, they only concern themselves with the good side. And for what I am concerned, I don't even allow my thoughts to go in the dark side's direction. I just stay away from it, and I concentrate on the light. But what you talked about in that experiment, John, that is exactly it. It was over half it dropped down. So this stuff worked. And I tell you, I'm going to spend about 45 seconds to tell you another example that was so phenomenal that it needs to be mentioned. And that is about 20-some years ago, Art Bell on Coast to Coast Live, he did a mind experiment because Texas was burning up. They had not had rain for 3 months. And towns were running out of water, cattle was dying, everything was, there was brush fires everywhere. And Art Bell went on the air to his 10 millions or possibly more listeners back then. And he said, let's all visualize rain over Texas. And we did. I was listening that night and I participated. So we did that. And they were talking in the meantime, but we were all thinking about thunderstorms and rain over Texas. That later that night, next day, there were thunderstorms all over Texas, and the weather forecasters came out and said, we are dumbfounded. There were no moisture in any of the computer models to create this rain. This shouldn't have happened, but it did. They did not understand. Well, I understood. It was the mastermind that created that rain over Texas. And right now, we are in the process, me and 2 other people here, Nori and Tom, we're in the process of setting up a mastermind group that will do things like this. And I want everybody on here to join us because this is going to be good. And if I can mention where they can contact us, that would be great.
Yeah, of course.
That is, you can go to us on broadcastteamalpha.com and go to the contact page and put your email and information in there, and we will send you information. Also, or broadcastteamalpha@gmail.com. And if you get in touch, we will set up this, we can get you into it, and we can participate in doing things that would really make a difference in our own lives, because we can also, by putting the mastermind group together, we can concentrate on things that will affect and benefit everybody involved, especially in economics and health, because that is so general, it can help everybody, not just rain over Texas.
Yeah, exactly. And this just also proves another major point of the different uses of what this can do. Robert illustrated the negative effect. You just illustrated something physical that can happen. And one of the things that I wonder, and both of you, please, if you guys have any answers to this, I did hear a scientific reason of why we're having these massive hurricanes. It is solely because of the water warming up. But my question to both of you is, do you think through the Maharishi effect, if people are positively thinking about less destruction on this earth. I guess that's a one way to put it. Do you think there's a way that we can decrease the size of these hurricanes and maybe avert some of these massive earthquakes that are going around? Because I got to tell you, living here in Los Angeles, being right at the epicenter in the 94 Northridge quake, with Lucy Jones being on a national tour saying the big one, the San Andreas fault will without a doubt erupt by the next 20 years. And by the way, it is overdue several hundred years for that matter. Kind of scares me. So with regards to these natural disasters, whichever one of you wants to talk about first, can we do exactly what Aage said, but the opposite end of the angle to stop it, essentially? What do you guys think?
There is a way to change that. And that I've been watching the Weather Channel, and I've seen, especially now with the hurricane from in the Pacific coming in over Southern California and Baja, I've been watching out in the northern part of the Atlantic. There's been a low pressure sitting out there, and it's been sitting there for a long time rotating. If anybody know anything about, well, you know, I've been a pilot. I flew for a living for 23 years. I understand weather patterns, and I was trained in it, and I used to teach it. So if you look at that low pressure sitting out there, it is not natural, because low pressures, they always move across the country, even across the water. But this one was sitting out there. And because it rotates to the left, when the hurricane came up the coast, it could not go any further up than mid-California, so it's headed straight right and coming in over Baja up to Arizona, because it couldn't go any further because of that low pressure up there. Now, what could cause that? HAARP can. And they are doing weather modifications with HAARP. They are doing it around the area where the low pressure is, so that they stick the low pressure right there, and then they direct the hurricane to where they want it to go. That's my opinion, and I think it coincides with science fairly well.
Robert, what do you say?
I say that it's a coherent theory. I would like to point out to the public that the concept of weather wars was started in 1968 by the Russians, when they learned to skip microwave beams off lake surfaces like Lake Ladoga near Leningrad and off the ionosphere. They learned how to coordinate two beams to intersect over certain areas of the Earth, because this is over the horizon projection of microwaves. They found that they could trisect three beams over an area and create very powerful atmospheric effects. This discovery arrived in 1968 because the CIA and the NSA started to pick up a signal that sounded like a woodpecker. It was like a peck, 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 peck. And so they gave it, they call it the woodpecker beam. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look up the work of Dr. Tom Bearden. But that said, the HAARP that we built and have built, not only in Alaska, but in several other locations around the Earth, are a response to that. And I would like to say that not all things about HAARP are evil. Let's take, for example, the warming of the Earth, which I believe is provable to be due to solar activity, because the rate of increase of the heat on Earth is reflected by the atmospheric heat rise in Mars, as well as Neptune, and even outer planets. So this is a natural effect. However, with regard to the melting of the ice caps, folks, I think the melting of the ice caps is not a bad thing, and I'll tell you why. In 1953, Charles Hapgood and Albert Einstein hypothesized their explanation for why the North Pole has shifted so many times in geological history. The North Pole actually used to be what we call Switzerland right now at one time. And there are other places that were the North Pole, as opposed to the one that we have now, the magnetic North Pole being in Canada, and the geographical North Pole being up there at the center, at the top of the world. Einstein and Hapgood said that their explanation for the shift of the North Pole, this pole shift as we call it now, was that over eons of time, the ice pack on Antarctica and in the Arctic Circle grew so thick, so dense, so heavy that the angular momentum imparted by the rotation of the Earth in its orbit increased the momentum. The momentum, that's mass in motion. As the ice grew thicker, the forces of momentum grew greater, and that at a certain critical point, the two ice caps would physically shift the entire crust of the Earth, wrapping around, changing position due to the weight of the ice. So, if this Einstein-Hapgood theory is correct, the world was facing a geological catastrophe of incredible proportions, which none of us could really survive, folks. If the crustal displacement, as described by Einstein and Hapgood, was real, there could have come a day when it just flipped and we would see the sun move 30, 40, 50, 90 degrees, who knows how far, in the sky. The oceans would be thrown out of their beds. Human civilization would be wiped out. So I don't think that the diminution of the thickness of the ice caps is as catastrophic as letting them build up. If it was HAARP that's doing it, again, I believe that a lot of it has to do with solar activity. But that is my point about one good thing about HAARP. I'll tell you another good thing about HAARP. HAARP is a weapon that harnesses plasma in the aurora borealis. And the plan is that should China, Russia, less so now North Korea, or Pakistan, or any other enemy of the United States launch missiles to come in over the poles as they were expected, as they passed over the northern reaches, the HAARP instrument would start to fluctuate the aurora borealis in such powerful waves of electromagnetic plasma, geomagnetic plasma, that any warhead, any missile flying through them would be destroyed, fried, and their circuits disrupted. So that if they did make landfall in Canada or in the United States, they would land as radioactive duds. So that's one of the plans for the use of HAARP as a defensive weapon. And of course, if China and Russia are conducting weather wars on us, we do have to have a response. But I think they've gone so far with it now that they are actually disrupting hurricanes. For example, Hurricane Florence, which came into South Carolina, that monster was barreling in at a Category 4, and then a Category 3, and then in an instant, as it was moving into the warmest of waters, which should have built up its power and its strength, it collapsed into a Category 1 when it actually struck South Carolina and then moved inland for these torrential floods. So I don't think we have 100% of the picture. There are two sides to every story, and that's what I know about HAARP. It is dangerous to people living near it. It's a very powerful field. I know soldiers, Marines who guarded some of the first HAARP installations. I know one of the engineers who assembled it, and the poor man suffers terribly from lesions and tumors and burning of his skin. He's hypersensitive to microwaves, and whenever high-intensity microwaves are turned on near his house, and for example, Air Force bases around, and when they turn it on, his skin starts to feel like it's burning, and it's horrible. So The other thing I'd like to speak against, so long as we're talking about technologies and good and bad, I rarely say anything against the United States Navy because I think they're really the white hats in the military. They are the ones who have revealed the UFO presence to the world. But they have this thing called a towed array, low frequency towed array sonar, which puts out these horrific sounds, which is disrupting the sea life, making whales and dolphins beach themselves. It's horrific, terrible, terrible anti-submarine weapon. So I would be more concerned with what the low frequency towed array technology of the Navy is doing to sea life than I am about HARP melting the ice caps.
I think that is actually a big problem that we have to worry about what is happening to our sea life, because if that dies off, a huge part of our chain of life if that is wiped out, it'll have effects that I don't think anyone has really grasped. Oh, okay, the ocean's empty. Okay, we don't have fish anymore. Well, folks, it's not just about that. I do want to take the opportunity after Aage talks about this topic to briefly talk about another piece of technology which will lead into another subtopic before we get into something major that both of you know, which is going to be holographic universe. My guess is at this point probably after the break. But on technology and the effects on sea life, what do you say, Aage?
Well, it doesn't look very good out there because of you can see the oceans are full of garbage, and many of the even the lakes are getting polluted because of the chemtrails and everything. There's poisons everywhere. So we need to get our heads together, and that is one thing where a mastermind could really do some good. Because you were talking about the hurricane coming into North Carolina.
Yes.
We did a mastermind group on that, and I mean others, quite a few others also mastermind that thing. And yeah, it did close down to a pretty good storm, I guess, before it hit the shore. But it could be a combination of things. What Robert was talking about here is plain pure science. We cannot get around that because that is the way it works. It can be used for both good and bad. So I think maybe they could have. I didn't think about that because normally when I think of government, I usually think about the negative part of what they're doing.
That's true. Yeah.
And yeah, doing something good like that, they could possibly do that too. So I'm kind of up in the air on that. But when it comes to the environment, major things have to happen. And in order for that to happen, people's mindset have to change, especially the people in DC. They need to change their mindset because that's where the money would usually flow from for a cleanup process that is necessary. And that is where we come in. We can help change their mind, and either by email or calling them and say, hey, bud, you're going to be voted out if you don't do as I tell you this time. So we need to pressure them. Isn't that amazing? We have to threaten the government to have to see them do something good. That is pathetic.
It is. And let me say one piece that is actually a double-edged sword. Yeah, having term limits for the president and other people, other politicians, is a good thing because you don't want someone to become elected and then become a dictator. But I'm going to show you the other side of that argument. If you guys were paying attention, I'm talking about listeners. If you guys and gals out there were paying attention to what David Adair was saying, the problem is let's just take a president, for example. Historically, what happens is you have one person elected for the first 4 years, then pretty much that whole time in that administration is ensuring the second election. Once they win that second election, historically, I say historically because I'm hoping this POTUS is a little different, is that after about 2 years of making sure their pockets are nice and fat, leaving the office of the presidency and making sure all of their friends are connected in the right places, the last 2 years are the lame duck. So they're very short-sighted. They don't really think in terms of long-term planning, of the long-term effects of our planet, of the long-term effects of their short-sighted actions and decisions. And I think that is a problem when it comes to our reality, our environment, because we have to worry about the children of the future and the grandchildren of the future, which I don't think very many people are paying attention. We do have a question from a listener. Adderike Studios says or asks, has either guest heard of the underground bases or portals in the Marianas Trench? What do you gentlemen say?
That's for you, Robert.
Well, I have heard about a lot of portals, but I have never heard of any portals in the Marianas Trench. It would be a very unwise place to have
Yeah, I
a
haven't either.
portal. I mean,
Why
the
do you
deepest
say
part-
unwise?
Because it's the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. It's got the greatest pressure. You wouldn't want to subject your ships, your craft, your people to such incredible densities. It doesn't make sense to me. I do know about portals in other areas. Of course, we all know about the Bermuda Triangle, and
Yes.
then there
Devil's
is
Triangle as well.
Mount Adams in Washington State. The first UFOs were seen near Mount Rainier. A flight which I had the privilege of flying in 1991. I went to a wedding in Seattle, and I went to the airport, rented a plane, and flew up and took the flight that Kenneth Arnold.
Yeah, I was just gonna say his name's
Yeah,
Kenneth
so
Arnold.
I had the real eyeball experience of the whole scene and seeing the two mountains that he used to estimate it. But portals are everywhere. There's a portal up here in New York, in Pine Bush, New York. My friend Bruce Cornett, Dr. Bruce Cornett, is an expert in that. I went up there one night to observe, caught a couple of interesting things in video. So they are, and also the deep underground bases. Now those are facts. Those are facts. You know, Dugway, Area 51, for example, when it was exposed. Edwards, Muroc. It used to be Muroc. That's Edwards Air Force Base. Let's see. Kirtland Air Force Base down in New Mexico has a lot of activity. And you know, Phoenix is always being overflown. I get videos from the people in Phoenix of UFO activities over that mountain range that they have out there. So they are all over the place. One of the reasons that I'm told we're really deeply entrenched in Afghanistan is the discovery of a UFO portal in Afghanistan.
The Vimana you're talking about, right?
And a cave of Vimana. Listen, Dr. J, I would love to recommend to the audience one of the best films I've ever seen. I would say it's the best film I've ever seen on the conflict in Afghanistan. And it's called The Objective. It's on YouTube. It's hard to find one with a really good soundtrack, but somebody did bootleg the disc and put it up, so you might still be able to see it. But it's about a CIA operation that's sent into Afghanistan. They grab a bunch of U.S. soldiers and tell them that they have to be under the orders of the CIA guy. And they trek deep, deep into Afghanistan, and in the trek into Afghanistan, you see the most amazing story unfold of UFO activity in Afghanistan, and the CIA sending an agent in there to record. And it is one of the amazing and graphic films I've ever seen. It struck me so deeply that I said to myself, who the hell made this movie? It looks to me like a bunch of soldiers in Afghanistan grabbed their high-8 cameras and decided to make a movie while they were there. It is that real in the telling of the story. But the most important thing about it is the revelation of an alien presence in Afghanistan, interest in from out. The shocker came at the end, titles rolled. The movie was produced, co-written and co-produced by the son of Wesley Clark Jr. And when I read that name across the screen, I said, oh my God, this is what's really happening in Afghanistan. I'm sure his father told him the story. Wesley Clark Jr., son of General Wesley Clark, produced this film. And I think it brings in the whole spiritual mythos of Islam into the story, because there are jinns and demons, and it's just a very fine film, and I encourage people to see it if you want to get an inkling of why the Afghanistan war has lasted all of these 17 years. So
Now, let me say one thing about USOs. First of all, when Adreich Studios was asking about portals, I don't know much about portals underwater, as you gentlemen would know, but I can say this without a doubt. I believe if we were able to see the bottom of the ocean at any given time unobstructed, or let's just say we had one of the coolest things when I was young, people always want some sort of superpower. For me, what I was kind of always dreaming what would happen is just to have the ability to take away the ocean for a bit and just walk on the bottom and see all these ships that are sunk and crazy little creatures and gold and UFOs, or better yet, USOs. A lot of people think they're two different things. They're not. A UFO, an unidentified flying object, becomes a USO, unidentified submerged object, the moment it hits the water and starts traversing underneath. One of the
Dr.
reasons.
J,
Yes.
I just wanted to interject for the listener who asked the question. We do know that there is a tremendous portal near Catalina Island.
Yes.
This is well known. And what is his name? There's a fellow who has specialized on USOs.
Preston Dennett.
Preston Daniels, right? He did excellent work.
Dennett, yes.
Preston Dennett, yes, indeed. And interestingly, this is the area, Catalina Island is the area where the United States Navy recovered the 1942 Battle of LA craft.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know that craft was hit.
Yep.
And then it was pursued by fighter planes and came down in the region of Catalina Island. And I've been told from credible sources that that's when the United States Navy reverse engineering program really began, because they were able to recover it or part of it and bring it to the surface at Catalina. But Preston Dennett's books, I think, show conclusively that this is an ongoing UFO base, not just a portal, UFO base. And as I'm on the topic, several years ago, I saw an underground or underwater computer graphic of the area off the coast of Malibu. And Robert Stanley wrote an article about this underground or underwater submarine base or UFO base that is hollowed out. It actually looks to me like engineering that was intentionally done underwater to prop up the Malibu shelf. Do you know that California overhangs the ocean? California is being held up from below, for a large part, by the pressure of the Pacific Ocean. Think of a shelf that comes out. The beach comes, then the beach ends, then there's a drop, but the water goes under the beach and behind. And I've been told that the Navy was able to sail submarines hundreds of miles through underwater caverns and tunnels, so that they have Navy bases in states that are not California. So that said, this base is there, the structure is there. They look to me like there were 24 gigantic monolithic columns that were put into that area, as I see it, to prop up and hold up Malibu from going into the ocean. You should look at it. You can find it in Google. If you do a Google search and go down off Malibu and go down underwater, you'll find it. Or type in Robert Stanley.
Yeah, that's right.
Robert Stanley and Malibu UFO base, something like that. You'll find.
Let me say one quick thing about Catalina. I don't know if many of you have seen this video because I don't know if it's on my channel or on Third Phase of Moon. Through Preston Dennett, because he is literally the worldwide USO expert, particularly in the Pacific Ocean, but he is the world-renowned USO expert. And somebody came to him from a story that was corroborated by a lot of people, and I'll give you the breakdown of the story. I believe this was 2014, possibly 2015. Boy Scouts were camping in Catalina. I believe there was about 4 troops with about 40 children, and with the adults and the older scouts, like the Eagle Scouts, the people who were in charge, combined, there was about 200 people, most of them children. And what they said, what happened over a period of 8 hours is, first, out of the water emerged this giant black sphere. And then out of that sphere came approximately 200 craft, 200 different craft in 8 different shapes. And they were from the typical disc to triangle, very much similar to what you saw in Belgium, to rectangles, flat squares, smaller spheres, and you would literally have to see the children's drawing from this. And obviously the children are very credible because, 1, children don't lie. 2, this is actually supported by parents. And of course you have multiple eyewitnesses. One of the stories that they were able to tell, particularly this one child that I was able to interview, and he actually, his parents wanted him to tell the story so much, they drove him from San Diego. Now, if you know anything about SoCal traffic, Southern California traffic, driving from San Diego to Los Angeles on any given day is pretty darn horrible. If you're doing it during the day, it's pretty worse than if you are doing it at night. And so they drove up with their child. He had already drawn several things, and while me and Preston and Preston's sister-in-law were interviewing this child, he was literally drawing everything in detail of what he had seen, the different craft, and this is all available on YouTube. But that was just another drop in the bucket of what happens in Catalina. If you've all paid attention to History Channel's special on USOs featuring Preston Dennett, and I believe even Bill Burns was there, which, by the way, Bill Burns will be on next week. And if you pay attention to that, there are so many stories. There's even a 911 call recorded about this gentleman who saw hundreds of craft come up, rise up slowly from the Pacific Ocean between Catalina and I believe it was either San Pedro or Long Beach. Anywhere in that region is essentially between the two of Catalina and the coast of California. And after these smaller craft came up, this one massive craft came up, and then one by one they all just took off from 0 miles per hour to several thousand miles per hour. Not a sound. And if you hear this 911 call, the person was really scared. Aage, I know you've had listeners and guests come on the show and talk about USOs, and probably talked about USOs in Catalina since you are near where I am anyway. What stories have you heard?
Well, more so actually. I have a story of my own there that I experienced, and that is that back in the dark ages, when I was in Greencastle, Indiana, I was teaching flying at the airport there. I became a fairly good friends with an airline captain that flew for Allegheny Airlines at the time. And he used to fly charter flights from Indianapolis and Washington and places in the U.S. down deep into the Caribbean. And he said, we got to talk about UFOs, and he said that there are times when he's flying over a certain area in the Caribbean, and he explained where it was at the time, but I gotta reach into my file cabinets in the back of my head here to find it. He said there are places down there where you can see big blotches of light in the water. And there's one place where there are 2 blotches, probably about 5 miles apart, he said, and there's a string of light between the two of them. So this is down in the Caribbean, and this airline captain, he said he's seen it more than once, when quite a few times when he flew over it. If there was a dark sky, he said, with a new moon and a moon was not up, and then you could see it. Otherwise, if it's a bright moon, it was a little difficult to see it because it wasn't really bright. It was deep down in the water. So there are underwater bases in the Caribbean, and of course, we can all wonder who's there. I'm sure it isn't us. When I say us, I mean mankind, because it was too big for that. He said there were probably a mile or two across these blotches of light. So that take a phenomenal dome to hold that. I don't think we had the technology back then to create something like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so fascinating about this topic. Before we go to the break, I'm going to give it back to Robert real quick, because obviously he's been studying USOs and longer than me. Because I hate to be a little stupid about this, or sounding stupid, because I've been really investigating this for a long time. But when I was really young and I first heard the term USO, I'm like, wow, really? Is that something different, totally new? Is that like extraterrestrial submarines? Of course, I was only 5, so it wasn't very much longer after that I realized these are absolutely the same thing. And it didn't take a documentary or a researcher saying, hey, kid, just so you know, they're the same thing. No, I mean, it was just pretty common sense, especially with the descriptions. And lately, with the advent of everybody having an HD camera in their pocket, with the video camera now, it's pretty darn hard not to capture or see a lot of this footage going around. And so that is why I've seen more so in the last 10 years USOs entering and leaving the water that I've never seen in my life. And I know both of you will understand this, because these craft have a field around them, which is why they're able to fly as fast as they are in the sky and not break the sound barrier. Well, they have the same little field enveloped around them when they're going through the water, which is why they are going so fast underwater, sometimes supersonic, and yet the drag of water is not slowing them down. Now, this may be hard to understand, folks, but try to picture this. When a craft enters the water, it never physically touches the water. I know you gentlemen know about this.
Yes, indeed. Yes. As a matter of fact, you brought to mind the story William Cooper told me, and told everybody, told me personally, that he was on the conning tower of a submarine that was moving between Seattle and Pearl Harbor. He was on the watch, and all of a sudden he saw this eruption of the ocean, and he saw a flying disc leave the ocean and climb straight up into the sky in an instant. He was totally shocked. So he called the captain and reported it. The captain came up, and then they kept the watch, forward watch and the rear watch, and the captain and the XO, and they were scanning. They saw the same craft come back, but William Cooper said that this flying saucer, this disc, was tumbling end over end, and just before it touched the waters parted, and these were his words, the waters parted just like you saw in the movie The Ten Commandments. The waters parted, the UFO went in, and the waters closed. That's the kind of phenomenon.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you a personal story. I think we have, it's 8 o'clock. Do you want to take the break?
No. I'm going to let you tell this, because when we come back, we're going to switch topics. So I'm going to let you tell this, and if Aage has anything he'd like to comment on this, then I will let him, and then, of course, we'll take a quick break.
I'd like to tell you a quick story, quick history of USOs in the Hudson River. In the 1970s, a woman in New Jersey, that's my local police, folks.
Yeah, I figured.
Sounds of New York City news. This is a live, living, breathing New York City. Anyway, this lady reported seeing lights moving under the Hudson River. A UFO landed near the same building complex, landed in a softball field, and it was seen by local residents and a doorman in a building across the street. And he said that it looked like an egg, and he saw it in the field, and he walked out of the building to take a look at it. And when he looked at it, he saw some action, and then it just went from the field into the sky in less than 2 seconds. And he said the thing that scared him most was that there was absolutely no sound with this acceleration. Then it happened that one day in 1974, my brothers and three other friends, my brothers, one cousin, and two other friends who were in a kung fu group that trained together. We always used to go down to the riverside in the summer to train, to do kung fu. I didn't go that day. They came back in shock and terror and trembling. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "You won't believe it. We were down by the river and we were looking up at the George Washington Bridge. Then we saw a light in the water appear under the George Washington Bridge, and we saw it come down the river, all the way down the river, and it stopped in front of us. And then as we were looking at it, we saw this light coming toward the shore, and we heard this noise, this deep, deep hum. It was a real weird sound, a real low sound, and it scared the hell out of us, and we just took off, and they just ran straight to my house to tell me about it." So they are around, they are near, they are far. They are sometimes benevolent. I'd like to tell you a story that was told to me by a captain, a fishing boat captain down off the coast of Nicaragua in Central America. He told me that he had gone out to sea and on a totally black night, moonless night in terrible weather, and he lost his bearings.
Oh.
And he didn't know which way was up. The sea was rough for a while, and then he didn't know where he was. And he's talking about a year like 1962, when there's no GPS. And he said that as he was by the helm, he was guiding the ship. The pilot was steering the ship. All of a sudden, he saw a light in the water. A light that was coming from underwater appeared, and he said to the pilot, "Follow that light." He said he just knew. He just knew. He didn't question it. He knew he was lost. He knew he had no hope. He saw the light underwater, and he turned to the pilot and said, "Follow the light." And he said the light moved, and then the light veered off, and he said, "Follow the light," and the light led him all the way back to the bay where he was hoping to find home. So they do intervene in positive ways, but at other times they just sweep people right off their yachts, and you find them floating with no people in the Bermuda Triangle. There's another area called the Devil's Sea.
I know, that's what I was mentioning when you brought up the Bermuda's Triangle. The Devil's Triangle by Japan.
Yeah, the Devil's Sea, I think they call it, because there isn't really a triangle. The triangle of the Devil's Triangle in Bermuda is Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and Miami, for Florida. There's another area in Afghanistan, by the way. There are, let's just call them Devil's Triangles over land. And one of the most infamous is over Afghanistan, where a lot of airliners were disappearing, as well as a lot of activity out in Western China. If you do a Google search and go looking around in Western China, you will find the Chinese have built some really incredible things. They're not structures, they're not buildings. They look like solar panels that are miles and miles wide with different geometric patterns and configurations in them. And some people think that they are for communicating with aliens or giving them clearance to land, things like that. And there's an area in Western China from which the government has forbidden people from entering because too many people, like climbers, hikers, have disappeared. And at the same time, also in Western China, over 1 million Uyghurs are in concentration camps. Uyghurs are Chinese Muslims, and
Oh,
the Chinese, yeah,
interesting.
Chinese came down on the Uyghurs, and they have mass incarcerated 1 million Uyghurs, keeping them in concentration camps. Not necessarily extermination camps, folks. That only comes when they need the organ.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Let me say this real quick before we take our quick break. One of our listeners in the YouTube chat, when we were talking about USOs and how the fact I mentioned that they do not touch water or even air for that matter. A lot of people think, oh, they're in the air. Well, they're touching air. No, that's not true either. He said exactly what I was talking about, that there's an anti-gravity field involved and the craft create its own. I mean, that is an undisputed fact. Just watch a video and you'll know exactly what we're talking about. Well, with that, folks, we are going to take a short break. We're going to come back and we're going to be talking about the holographic universe. So everybody stay tuned. Much more with Mr. Aage Nost and Robert Morningstar, two of the greatest guests and hosts you can find anywhere. And we'll get a super announcement with Robert Morningstar at the end of the show that has to do with late night in the Midlands. Soon, all three of us folks will be right at the same place. We'll be right back. Everybody stay tuned.
There are days that the red pill is bitter in my stomach, but I can't get it back out. I think because I have to. I speak because I have no choice. I walk through this dark age we're in with open eyes. Listen to Open Eyes on latenightinthemidlands.com. And together, maybe we won't stumble and fall.
Data. The sensors can't penetrate the planet's ionosphere. There's too much interference. Can you find a way to scan for life forms?
I would be happy to, sir. I just love scanning for life forms. Life forms. You tiny little life forms. You precious little life forms. Where are you?
Even the ETs know this is the place to be. L&M Radio Network.
You can listen to the L&M Radio Network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the Paranormal Radio app. Available from lnmradionetwork.com or TalkStreamLive.com on both Android and Apple. Our call to listen line is open 24/7. Dial 701-719-9704 so you can listen on the go.
Ever wanted to be sure your robot slave was behaving? Is Echo getting out of control and meeting with Alexa when you're not around? You need RoboGrog. RoboGrog is the new product from Snooze You Lose, the company that also brought you the fine products of Flog a Horse and Calm You Down Now. RoboGrog will put your robotic minions to sleep, bringing their AI a sense of peace and comfort. It does this by sending bolts of electricity straight where the sun doesn't shine. Get RoboGrog today at any fine retailer and set yourself free from the devices that bind you.
You can't just throw someone into prison and silence their warning because you don't agree with them. You don't have to like my methods or what I stand for. Silencing me won't make the problem go away. It will just whittle away at the ability of people to be ready for the real threats. And when the worst happens, and it will, maybe you can take comfort in protecting the people from a dangerous radical who wanted to tell them the truth.
Tired of searching for great talk and great information? Look no more. L&M Radio Network, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Back home, there's a growing pro-Earth movement. Rumors of hate groups targeting aliens. And on all sides, the fanatics. think that society has to be protected against anyone who's different. I'm starting to wonder if what we just saw is a preview of things to come.
No, I can't believe we'd be that foolish.
Santayana. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
All right, we are back for the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, as you probably already know from the name of the show. Real quick, folks, I do want to encourage all of you out there to download the app Minds or just create an account at minds.com, minds.com. It is a better version of Facebook. It uses @tags, hashtags. The people at InfoWars who were banned by social media are found there. And so is Roger Stone. He goes by the moniker, his full name actually, Roger J. Stone Jr. And again, I say this all the time. I would really hope each and every one of you out there listening knows that everything you need to know about the show is the name of it. That's it. Just the name of the show. Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. And this includes accounts from Minds, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Google+, YouTube, for those of you who are already right there right now, Patreon, Buffer, whatever you could think of, BitTube, it's all there under the same thing, DRJ Radio Live. And speaking of Patreon, there's a lot of cool stuff for you guys out there that have to do with the show. And as a matter of fact, someone has already joined Patreon as the very first patron. So let me give this person a shout out from Hawaii. We got A.A. Nakamura. I hope I said that properly. Mr. Nakamura, I want to thank you for being the very first patron via Patreon. Now, you have to have caught the show very late to know that I'm speaking to two of the most intelligent guests that I bring on the show fairly regularly, Mr. Aage Nost and Mr. Robert Morningstar. And we were talking about the Maharishi effect. We were talking about HAARP, technology, USOs, the Catalina Island, Afghanistan, different portals. We are going to take this opportunity to switch gears a little bit, and we, my guests, folks, are about to give you that big red pill. Time to go down the rabbit hole as we talk about the holographic universe. I'm going to turn it over to Aage and to open up this conversation before I turn it over. Robert. Aage, what say you about the holographic universe? And, of course, give people a little background of it, too.
Okay, one red pill coming up.
Yes, that's right.
And it tastes so good. Truth always tastes good. And we're talking about the holographic universe. Or, I think most people, most reasonable thinking people, they figured it out by now if they studied a little bit that the Big Bang never really happened. And I would say that for the last 300 years, I've said this before, but if you've heard it before, just bear with me because it's so good. It explains the universe we are in. And it also almost, I would say, reach all the way up to evidence. Because when we're talking about quantum mechanics, a lot of that now is backed by scientific experiments, not just theory anymore for a lot of it. So let's say that for the last 300 years or so, at least since Newton, we've been told that this universe was, that matter and energy cannot be created from nothing. So we know that. Well, And then again, we have some of the most brilliant people on the planet, like Stephen Hawking at Cambridge University in England, and bless his soul, he just left us, but he leaves a legacy. And he and most other theoretical physicists, they're saying that their equations on the blackboard show that this universe was created from nothing. And then if this universe was created from nothing and everything in this universe was created from nothing, and you are in this universe created from nothing, what are you? Now we got to think.
Exactly.
Let me give you one more thing to prove to you that there is something here, not just hot air. I am a hypnotist. And if I put you in a soft chair and talk to you for 10 minutes and put you in a deep hypnotic trance and tell you that when you wake up, you will see an elephant standing next to you in the room. Now, I snap my finger, count to 3 backwards, and bring you back out of that hypnotic trance. You would see that elephant if I did my job right. You can smell him. Doesn't smell very good. And you can hear him breathing. You can reach out and touch the snout of that elephant. You can feel the rough texture on your fingers. That elephant is just as real to you as you look around you in the room where you're sitting right now. The trick is that I can't see the elephant because he is not there, but you would see it sitting in that chair. And you can feel it, smell it, taste it. Well, I don't know if you want to taste it, but you can smell it and feel it. So now, what happened to your real world? It went away on you, didn't it? So now, what is the difference of what you see in that hypnotic trance and the room that you're looking at right now, including the cat sitting on the chair across the room? What's the difference?
I honestly, I don't know. Nothing, right? It's just the perception, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is our reality. It's a mind-created illusion, created by the mind behind it all, which is the consciousness. It creates this holographic, and the reason I say holographic is because I was watching a video on YouTube where there was a theoretical physicist. He was there and he said, I have found computer numbers or computer code in the space-time continuing matrix. He said there are sections that repeats themselves on a regular basis inside the matrix formulas. So there is a computer program behind this. And he called it a computer program, though they can be called, intelligent design or many other things. Yes. But there's something there that creates this reality that we are creating from our consciousness to surround us and for us, or should I say the soul or the consciousness behind it, so that soul or consciousness can have a physical experience and experience things that in a spiritual existence they cannot experience because they don't have the physical body and they don't have the physical surroundings to learn from in the physical arena. And this gets very deep.
I'm going to switch to Robert now because I know Robert knows a lot about this as well. This is why when we were discussing different topics earlier, and of course, Robert, I think you read that message that I definitely do want to save that for next time when you're on, because Aage doesn't know much about the other topic, as neither do I. But this topic, I said to you guys that this is going to be very educational for me because, of course, I've had guests on the holographic universe, but I have much to learn about this topic. So, Robert, let's turn it to you.
Okay, as far as the hologram is concerned, it is something that I adhere to, and I have
Oh, Robert, we're losing you a little bit. You there with us? Robert, you're breaking up a little bit.
Believed in. Yeah, so I was saying that I followed the holographic theory of the mind since the 1970s when Pribham and Boehm came together to produce the theory. It's called the Pribham-Boehm theory of the holographic mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the insight that it gave me is that our reality, our sense of reality, is inverted and projected. Everything that we know, that we think is external to ourselves, as we see it right now, is not outside ourselves. It is actually a hologram. It's being projected. And visually, let's just talk about visually. The visual image that you are seeing of yourself in the room, of the monitor in front of you, something that is external to yourself, but it is not that thing. That image of the monitor that you're looking at right now is a projection, a holographic projection in the back of your head. It's really not in front of you, it's actually behind you in literal point of fact as to where this image is being created in the optic lobe, which is in the back of your head. And so we have this psychological faculty as humans that we turn things inside out. Instead of realizing that everything we're seeing in front of us is in the back of our heads, we project it outside ourselves. And it's interesting that the Qi masters of China, the grandmasters who taught me about consciousness, say an interesting thing about the eyes, that one eye is receptive and one eye is projective, and that the receptive eye takes in the information into the brain, and that the right eye projects form upon it. The point is, everything you're seeing is not everything that's out there.
And that's not reality, yeah.
No, it's all real, but it's being filtered. There is an organ in the brain called the lateral genicular body, and the optic lobe, the eyes, feed the optic nerve. The optic nerve goes to the thalamus, where the lateral geniculate filters all the information into essential survival information and familiar concepts, and filters them and projects them into the back of your head and allows them to go through. It's a very complex process by which one side, the left side and the right side, independently decide what is to be allowed into the back of your head, to be projected as real, as present, as there outside yourself. Now, I know a little more about this because I have no qualms about admitting that I grew up in the 1960s at a time when psychedelics were legal, and I have experienced higher states of consciousness that are imparted by psychotropics. And what you come up with when you have the experience is that what we are essentially is a point of consciousness. That is the meaning of I am that I am. That is the meaning of the first person and the creation. The awareness of yourself is a consequence of your being conscious. Your consciousness is you. Now, we are in this body, we call ourselves human, we have minds, we have perceptions, but we confuse our identities with the body rather than the point of consciousness that is perceiving reality through the body. I wear my body like a diver wears a diving suit. It's a protective device so I can operate here at the bottom of this ocean of air. And as a result, the capacity to interact. I wear my body suit. It is something that has made it possible for this point of.
Oh no, Robert, we keep losing you. Your half your words are coming in, the other half are cutting out. Robert, you still with us? Robert. Well, that's okay, because I know Aage can respond to what Robert was saying, since both of these gentlemen are well versed on this holographic universe. So I'm basically trying to interview guys from the point of really not knowing as much as I would hope to, and that's why I look at this point as me taking the red pill as well. What do you got to say, Aage?
Well, he's exactly right. In fact,
Come
he is
down
very...
here and exist in this world.
Robert, you're cutting bad. We're catching part of what you're saying. Uh-oh.
Go underwater or go into outer space.
Oh, Robert, we're losing you pretty darn badly. That's okay. Go ahead, Aage.
Yeah, and anytime he gets the connection back up, I'd love to hear more from him because he speaks very eloquent on this subject. I mean, it's better than I could do. And I think he's right, though, because our visual perception is kind of like a movie theater. It's playing a movie, and you are the star actor in it. And it is all created in the mind. So what we have in our mind the most dominant is also what we're going to have in our life around us. Think of it this way. If most of what you're thinking about is drugs and crime and stuff like that, guess what you're going to have in your life? That is what you draw to you. That's what your mind allows to be created around you. So when you straighten your thinking out and raise your vibration, and then you start seeing different things being created around you, or the other term, draw to you. So it is up to us to control our mind, because if we don't control it, somebody else will, that we also allow to dwell in our mind. And
oh no, how did we lose both of our guests at the same time? Maybe Robert was trying to come back. Welcome to live radio, folks. That's all I could say every time this happens. I think we might have gotten back, Robert, but Aage, finish your thought, because we did lose you literally as you were saying it. And we lost Robert again. Go ahead, Aage.
Okay, yeah, I was saying that it is important how we control our mind, because the mind is what creates everything around us. So if we are dwelling most on drugs and crime and stuff, that is what we're going to have. So if we can control our mind and keep negativities out of our mind, we're going to have more positive things in our life. And that is what I write about in my book, Spiritual Science, Higher Conscious Thinking, and How to Access the Universal Consciousness. I teach people in there how to use their mind, because we haven't been taught how to use our mind. Even memory is a simple thing. Everybody thinks it's automatic. No, it isn't. There are ways to improve it. There are ways to perfect it. And in the book there, I go through a lot of the things that it takes for mind training to give you and be able to do things that you thought possibly could be almost impossible. So think about that, because the mind-created universe starts in the mind, and it is in the mind always. It's just that it doesn't appear that way.
Here is actually something that I was thinking, and if this relates to it, because this has to do with perception. For instance, what we see, right? So let's just say you're looking at a blades of grass. Okay, what we see is we see the shape, we see the color. My question is that our perception of that color? I mean, sure, we're all seeing colors the same way, but is that really the color green? Is it something else, and yet we perceive it as green? Or what we're actually looking at, feeling, touching, even smelling, exactly what it is? Or is it all just created in our mind? What do you think, Aage?
Well, it's I was wondering about that a long time ago. And if you take a green, let's say a flower, take a red flower, and you squash the leaves on it, it does not leave the color red on your fingers. There is no color in it. It is just a structure of the flower in the leaf, or the yeah, whatever it's called. The structure there that reflects light that comes back as red. And it may very well be somewhat similar in the green blade, except for they have chlorophyll, which is green. But in the blossom, there is no color if you squash it. So that's, again, only a perception. And we think of it as color, but there is just the mind that perceives it as a color, because I imagine that we have commonly accepted that there's colors to the flowers.
And this exactly goes to what we're saying. And then again, speaking of the flowers, what about the smell? Again, is it just something we created in our minds? And what if, this is just a hypothetical that maybe you can comment on, what if this goes back so many thousands of years to the very first time that particular flower was smelled by either a Homo sapien or an offshoot, and that was described as smelling that way? Do you think it's possible that the perception of that smell was thus created and embedded in the human consciousness, as opposed to it being exactly what we believe it to be? Because, for instance, roses, they smell great, right? People talk about wake up and smell the roses. What if they smelled like a steaming pile of dog crap? But what if, going back thousands of years, that somehow our perception was that this is a beautiful smell because the flower itself is beautiful? Now, again, this is really reaching out there. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that, do you think it's possible that something like that could have happened? Now, not just about, I mean, not particularly about the smell of flowers, but I mean about anything going on in society today, or anything that is physical, tangible, that we feel, smell, hold, touch, all of the above, and perceive the color. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it reaches back into the same principle as waking up from a hypnotic trance, seeing the elephant. You can smell him, you can touch him and feel the rough texture of the skin, but there's no elephant there. So if you smelling a flower, let's say go back about some 60 million years or more, there was a humanoid or a creature that smelled the flower for the first time. And then it accepted the fact that, oh, this thing smells like that. But we got to remember that thing that smelled that first flower was an artificially created structure by the universal consciousness behind it. So there was nothing real smelling the flower. It was the consciousness smelling it, and the consciousness accepted that, oh, the flower, this flower smells that way. And that is transferred all the way up into our present day. That particular thing, the consciousness accepts that particular flower to smell in a certain way, and that is transferred down into your mind, and through that mind into the brain that creates the projection of that flower in front of you. Did that make any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, again, this just goes to show the depth of, again, perception and of our collective consciousness. Now, one thing we did talk, and I hate to change the topic in this way, but we don't have more than 20 minutes left for the show. But something we both talked about when we were talking about holographic universe, and we are joined by Robert Morningstar again, was Miss Christine Blasey Ford and her testimony against Kavanaugh. And after you guys said this, one thing I did hear myself was the fact that, of course, you know, that the Senator Warren, or as I like to call Pocahontas, she used that opportunity with the accusers, with Ford, to say, hey, well, this is our opportunity to, quote, take him out. Essentially, it sounds to me like it was something that was, planned. But the reason I bring her up is because of some of the things she said on the stand. And of course, what I recently found out, thanks to Robert Morningstar, and I know you know this, Aage, was she is the daughter of a CIA officer, or as I like to call, clowns in America. Which one of you is going to tackle Miss Ford first? Dr. Ford. I don't even know if I want to. She deserves that doctor title for me, but whatever.
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
I'll be happy to. Well, the most recent days being reported on the mass media is that she is the daughter of a man named Ralph Blasey Jr. and the sister of Ralph Blasey III. And Ralph Blasey Jr. was a major financial officer in the CIA. Between 1962 and 1964, he ran the bank that the CIA used to pay for its black operations. That means that Mr. Blasey was in charge of CIA money during the presidency in 1964. She is also apparently the granddaughter of Nicholas Deak, who is well known in financial circles as Deak Pereira, the Wall Street institution, Deak Pereira. So, to make a long story short, I believe that Christine Blasey Ford is an emperor. She does look victim, sounds like a weird caricature. I would call her performance a caricature. And that she has all of the attributes of a person who suffered MK Ultra trauma-based conditioning to make her what are called the Jones model. When they're young, they're used as sex spies, as couriers, as agents, provocateurs, in the sense that they will lure someone into a situation for a sexual tryst that is photographed and recorded by CIA in order to have blackmail material on the individual. Now, this is something that the Russians perfected. They used to have spies that they call sparrows, whom they indoctrinated patriotically to, well, let's just say, do it for the motherland, for patriotism, do it for the motherland. So the CIA cultured, and that's the right word, cultured, like a new bacteria, this kind of spy agent who could be induced to kill people and not remember. This is one of the key experiments that they did. They were able to hypnotize two women and put them into a deep trance and induce one of them to take a gun and shoot it at the other. Of course, they didn't. They say they didn't put a bullet in the gun. So, another thing I mentioned earlier is that one of the things about this kind of mind control, trauma-based mind control, is splitting the psyche, able to embed false memories and false personalities, which are called alters. Alter is an other you. Alter means other in Latin. So this other is infused or implanted in the psyche. Is usually an artifact, and the person is conditioned anytime they approach these areas from which they're bitten. Amnesia will set in, but the alter jumps in to do the talk.
Robert, you're still cutting out. I don't know if they are attacking
And so
you. I don't know if it's
they often use cartoon characters. And this squeak voicing, it may be. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Well, it's been breaking up on both sides. Well, anyway, let me just finish that she has all the characteristics of an MK Ultra sexual trauma-based mind control victim. And her story changed. It's not consistent. She has lapses of memory, does not remember where it happened, does not remember when it happened, does not remember how she got there, does not remember how she got, does not remember who invited her. And what I've just rattled off are Mitchell report points that the prosecutor who interrogated her wrote up for the Congress. The fear of flying. Now, fear of flying is a really loaded term.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Oh, brother, I hope you understand, folks, that this is mass media level. When they start to talk about fear of flying, that's a buzzword. That's a code word for feminism. It takes the term from a book that came out in the 1970s. It's a manual for feminism. So when they started saying she had fear of flying, that was a buzzword that was going out into this network earlier, the consequences. So the factionalization of our society has created an apparatus whereby they can take each faction and apply mind control techniques to that faction to infuriate, like the woman in the elevator. Do you think she was in her right mind? Perhaps she was, because she was being paid by funded by a Soros corporation. So I think that she is a mind-controlled person, and that she's doing today what she did in the 70s when she became mature, what she did in the 80s and 90s when she was a mature sex pot. Folks, I hate to say it that bluntly, but going back into her background and his friend when she was the beach blonde in those photographs, she was very promiscuous and very. That is the technique that's used by CIA to discredit people, and they're using her now as an old lady to do exactly the same thing to Kavanaugh. But Kavanaugh is he's just a normal guy growing up in the 80s, and when you hear his explanation of the yearbook, it makes perfect sense. Do you remember what he said? It was the summer of John Belushi and Animal House, and do you remember that time? How nerdiness took over the country again, pushed by the mass media. And I loved it explained to the senator what the guy was asking him about 6 F's in his calendar. His calendar diary. Expecting to say, "Oh, you have 6 F's over here. What does that stand for?" Insinuating that you got F 6 times, and he says that was squeak. And he had a way of building up the F bomb, and he would go before he uttered the F bomb, and it was totally, comedic, ridiculous. But the effect is to inflame emotions. People are so numb and afraid to express their real emotions that they have to live emotions vicariously. And just because she put on the Minnie Mouse voice, my friend recognized it. What I was saying about cartoon characters. My friend, an Air Force captain in Ohio, wrote to me, "Hey, Bob, what is with her voice that he called her Mrs. Mickey Mouse?" And I said, "Oh my God, he hit it. He hit the nail right on the head. He recognized the Minnie Mouse alter that's embedded in her psyche, which jumped out and pretended to be something like a 14, 15-year-old girl at times. She just, she's not credible. And the FBI has interrogated Mark Judge and the main witnesses, and I don't think anything's going to come out of it except the stall that they wanted. But again, mind control is operant in every level of our society, and it's trying to hijack your consciousness at all times and keep against the pernicious effects of commercials. I have the habit, when a commercial comes on, I mute it. Then it becomes really entertaining. When you start to look at just the visual images without listening to the narrative, you start to see what is really very in a very ugly way embedded in those commercials. Study them. So that's what I have to say. The holographic mind, which I'm sorry about not speaking, the holographic mind is part of our nature. The essential self is a point of consciousness that is occupying the body at this moment, perceiving through it, operating through it, but it is not it. That point of consciousness is the I am that they speak about in the Bible. It's a spark of consciousness that comes from God.
It's funny you said spark.
Jung called it the scintilla.
You just said spark, Robert, and
Spark.
I don't know if this is just subconscious,
Yeah.
but the first thing that comes to mind
Dr.
is
James.
Spartacus. Mr. Cory Booker. Geez, I don't think I'll ever get that line out of my head.
Spartacus.
The old Spartacus moment.
Oh yeah. Well,
I'm sure you heard about this, and
that's associative thinking.
It is.
But you're a poet. That's why that happened to you. No poet.
The thing with both of you, I'm sure you probably know this by now. So everybody's talking about the accusers, so-called accusers of Kavanaugh. Well, first, let me just tell you from a legal standpoint, if you are even innocent with the slight possibility that you'll be convicted, I don't care how innocent you are, you're going to lawyer up. Not only did Kavanaugh not lawyer up, okay, he wants to take the stand. He is allowing a 7th investigation. But Cory Booker, for a quick moment, he wrote in the Stanford paper about how he so-called stole second base, how he had a sexual assault, he was the victimizer, and that he had learned from it. Okay, well, so what? So now you're going to allow Cory Booker to run as president of the United States, and yet because he apologized, because he learned from it, you're just going to let it go? That sounds like a huge double standard to me. Not to say that Brett Kavanaugh owes an apology. I mean, why the hell should he if he didn't do anything wrong? But look at the double standard from the GOP and the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. Now, Aage, let me ask you about Dr. Ford and her testimony and why this relates to what we were talking about the holographic universe and perceptions.
Well, we got to consider the source. If to keep it strictly physical, we got to consider the source because we know her background and we know her family and we know what brings with it into the equation from those sources. So there is no way that anybody that know that or a reasonable thinking person should take her serious. It's kind of obvious that she's being either used or paid off. That is my opinion. And besides that, those of us that is totally embedded in that kind of, I don't really know much about this because I don't watch TV anymore. I haven't done for God knows a year or two. And if we think a lot about politics, we will allow that kind of vibration to embed our mind, and it could bring us in a negative direction into a timeline that may not do us the best. And that's why with this mastermind group that I was talking about, we're keeping it totally positive, and we keep our mind where it needs to be in order to create positive things. And that's probably one of the reasons why I don't know a lot about politics anymore. I'm just kind of let it go.
Well, I was exactly like that, Aage, but I got to tell you, when Donald J. Trump announced his candidacy back in June of 2015, I couldn't have been happier. For once, you have a non-politician, a billionaire, who really can't be bribed by a few $100,000 or a few million to do some bidding out there, and someone who was born in this country, a patriot, and somebody who didn't need this job, and also clearly cares about his family, his children, and grandchildren. When he passes away, it's his children and grandchildren who have to live in this country unless they leave, which I don't see that happening. So, of course, he's going to go the extra mile to secure the future, not just for them, but for everybody they interact with. And I know you know this, Robert.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, John. Think of it this way. The president we have right now, he saved us from World War III because I'm thinking of a term here, but I call it Hillary.
Yeah, Crooked Hillary.
She promised us World War III. The way she did that, she says, I will bomb Syria. Guess what? Syria has a mutual defense treaty with Russia. How do you think the Russians would feel if we bombed Syria? That would not go over very well.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
No, I remember, Raghi, I didn't, obviously, I know that Syria would have kicked off Russia because Russia's helping Bashar Assad and we've been helping the rebels. I do know for a fact that the entire time of her campaign, it was like a known fact that if she is elected, we will be in war with Russia. And by default, China. Robert, what say you?
Yeah, I would say that was the song they were both singing because Obama warned President Trump that his worst problem was going to be North Korea and that he would probably have to face a war there. So he expected the worst, and the president has that habit of taking the worst and making the best of it. And who could have believed the joy in Kim Jong-un's face as he greeted the president of South Korea, President Moon, arriving last week? None of you saw it. None of you were shown this or allowed to see it, but I watch international news, and I saw the arrival of President Moon greeted at the airport by Kim Jong-un, and the joy. I mean, it's just so strange to me because one thing I never saw a North Korean do before this year was smile broadly with happiness.
No, you're absolutely right.
You know?
He never has. No, not him, not his father or grandfather.
Well, Trump has this infectious goodness or infectious
positiveness,
positive aura about him, and I think he did it both to Kim Jong-un, but earlier he did it to that general that came to the White House. That was the first time I saw his effect. That sour prune face general that represented him before the meeting went to Washington. And I'd seen that guy for years. I've been studying films of North Korea for years and years. And I mean, he is a really tyrannical murderer, killing people, executions, things like that. And he went in and spent 2 hours or an hour and a half with the president. When he came out, he was transformed. And for the first time I saw him, he smiled as he waved to the president as they put him in the limousine. That was the first instance. But then seeing the transformation of Kim Jong-un in greeting President Moon and looking forward to a positive future, I think that what President Trump has done this year with North Korea is equivalent or even greater than President Kennedy resolving the missile crisis. It's on the same level.
And you know what? We will, as a matter of fact, he's been nominated for the Nobel Prize, and that we will find out soon enough. Unfortunately, we have literally about 30 seconds left, and you know, everybody out there listening, we can continue to talk about this much further. I do want to thank all the listeners, and of course, Aage Studios in YouTube chat, unless there was somebody else I missed, but he has been there from the beginning, so I do want to give him a shout out. Briefly, gentlemen, if you can each, I'm going to start with Aage and then I'm going to finish with Robert. Plug in your show, any websites, any relevant information.
Okay, you can get a hold of me and let us know that you want to join the Mastermind group. Try us at broadcastteamalpha.com or the email at broadcastteamalpha@gmail.com. And I have a radio show on this platform, LNM Radio, and Fridays at 11 o'clock California time and 2 o'clock in the afternoon East Coast time. And also have a peek at my book. It's Spiritual Science, Higher Conscious Thinking, and how to access the universal consciousness. And you will learn how to use your mind in ways that you thought possibly would be impossible.
We're out of time, but briefly, Robert, go ahead and plug in your stuff, plus the announcement that you're going to be here.
Okay, thank you. First of all, you can keep up with my work in the paranormal and UFOs through UFOdigest.com. We were knocked off for 11 weeks after I published The Real Killer of R.F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, in June. But we're back online, and I'd like to point you to an article that I wrote there. It's called Averting Tai Chi War with China. It's very important, and I ask you to read that. That's at UFOdigest.com. My own show is on Revolution Radio. That's revolution.radio on Sundays at 3 o'clock, 3 to 5 Eastern, and it's called the Morningstar Report. And last Sunday, I did 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and we're going to be discussing Blasey Ford and these ongoing melodramas in Washington. I ask people to have confidence in the U.S. Constitution and have faith in the president, and that we're going to see this thing through. And don't be fooled by Minnie Mouse. Or her friend. Okay? The Minnie Mouse media. So, folks, thank you very much for listening, and I am happy to say that I've accepted an invitation to be on LNM Radio with Dr. J and Aage Nost, and we'll find out the schedule in the near future. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to it.
And this is great, folks, because all of my friends will be broadcasting from the same places I am. And also, again, I do want to make my quick thank yous. Of course, Katie and Daryl Neely for working so tirelessly and so hard behind the scenes, running the station, audio engineers, and way, way, way more than that. I mean, literally, I owe them. I wouldn't be on air if it wasn't for these two fine people. And, of course, Michael Vara for running the or owning the network Late Night in the Midlands. And I do want to thank, in the United Kingdom, JC of Deprogram Radio Network for syndicating this show, and in the United Kingdom. And that's pretty cool because we get a lot of listeners from London, Leeds, everywhere in the UK, as well as the EU. And of course, today, he's on today, starting next week, 5 days a week, Wise Frog from Black Swamp Digital Radio will be syndicating the show as well. And of course, all the YouTube listeners will get, viewers and listeners will get to hear the show and see the show with a picture of the guest and one of few pictures of me at the same time. Well, I would love to say more, but we have been out of time for a few minutes. Let me just say, tomorrow, join us, same place, same time. Joshua Warren will take the airwaves. Good night, folks.